Welcome to this edition of On Politics. I'm Dr. Eric Morrow at Tarleton State University, and we're glad to be back after a week reprieve there due to the extreme weather, but that gave us plenty of things to talk about that we'll see in a moment as we move forward with this episode of the show. But I want to welcome you today and to remind you that you can listen to the show right here on KTRL 90.5 each week on Sunday at noon, as well as live streaming through tarletonradio.com. And then if you miss any part of the show or you'd like to go back and look at previous episodes, we are on SoundCloud. You can look up On Politics with Eric Morrow and look at the schedule of previous shows and listen that way, or you can download as a podcast wherever you get your podcast, as well as articles related to the topics that we discuss on the show each week on our Facebook page. That's On Politics with Eric Morrow. So today we are turning to something that came up as a part of the snowvid or extreme weather, or however you want to refer to it, that iced down the state for a few days and then also left many people without power and water. And we still have some, I think, that are struggling to get that back on track, especially in rural areas of the state. But in this kind of cataclysmic event that happened that impacted everything from supply chains to people's quality of life, their well-being, because we had there were some deaths associated with this, with hypothermia, because people's power was not on. I mean, just significant impact across the state. It's not something that is just all of a sudden happened, even though the impact was. This is an issue that some have been giving attention to for a while now, with concerns about the provision of electricity in the state, how it's managed, and how do we adjust and accommodate some of the extremes that we do see in this state. And so I have with us today Dr. Ann Egelston, who is one of our political science faculty here at Tarleton State, and she is also the director of the Center for Environmental Studies here at Tarleton. She works on environmental law and policy issues at all levels of government, from local to international, and specializes in the intersection of environmental policy and energy policy issues, especially in areas involving renewable energy, sustainable development, and environmental finance. Her policy analysis work includes the Texas Renewable Energy Credit Program, as well as a variety of other environmental finance programs for acid rain, ozone depletion, and climate change. She has a bachelor's of science in chemical engineering from Texas A&M and a doctorate of philosophy and global affairs from Rutgers University. And I asked Ann to join us on the show today because this is an area that, while it may not be the concern for many people when the light switch works and the TV comes on and the water runs, it definitely became front and center as a concern of Texans this past week. And of course, it has political implications as well, as we've seen the response that's happening. And so welcome, Ann. We're glad to have you on the show today to discuss and really kind of dig a little deeper into some of the background of this issue.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we just want to, I think, start with the main question, which, of course, everybody's been trying to answer this question since all of this happened a little over a week and a half ago. What caused this? I mean, what was really because if you go on social media, and that's a challenge here, and I try to help our listeners correct some of the things they see on there. I think everybody from President Biden to my next door neighbor and their excessive use of electricity was blamed for what happened here. And I think people just don't understand how all some of this works. So could you give us a little background on what led up and what really caused this event that we experienced?
Well, at the simple level, it is simply that liquids froze. And when I say that, and I mean that liquids froze, there's really two liquids of concern here. One is that natural gas pipes froze. And so supply to a facility and supply inside the facility froze, and it forced plants offline because they didn't have the fuel needed to run. I think the thing that people are forgetting is that the majority of our fossil fuel fired electricity generation also requires water as an integral part of the manufacturing process. And at specific plants, water pipes froze. So you didn't just have wind turbine plants go offline because the wind turbines froze. You had natural gas plants go offline because the natural gas pipeline supply wasn't there. But you also had coal and nuclear power plants who also went offline, not because they had problems getting fuel, but because the water was freezing in the pipes inside the system. And so the simple answer is the pipes weren't winterized properly down to that kind of temperature. The much more complicated issue is that not only did we not have that pipe freeze, our infrastructure wasn't able to correct or to adjust in a quick and timely fashion.
So when we're looking at that, people are trying to understand. I mean, of course, everybody knows that this was an extreme weather event. To have this a low of temperatures in Texas. I mean, I was out of the state for about 7 years back in the early part of the first decade. But other than that, thinking back of my time in Texas, I don't remember temperatures getting this low across the state as a whole. Of course, we look back and you see less population, less energy demand, which is another factor that we certainly see now. And trying to understand this too, is it something that we need to understand as a one-off in that, okay, this happens maybe like once in a generation or once in a half century or so, and does that the fact that could happen again counter the costs that would be involved in, saying, winterizing, doing things that they do in northern states in order to be able to continue to provide electricity when you have this extreme weather? Or is this a part of a larger kind of challenge the state has in supplying energy and enough types of energy, or the way that the supply is structured to make sure that we can get through something like this?
Well, while I'd like to say that this is a one-off event, if you go back and look at Texas and grid reliability, what you'll find out is that Texas is actually one of the states that loses all or part of its power grid on a semi-regular basis. Now, it's not always to winter impacts, but I think there are some bigger picture issues with grid reliability that are going to be looked at for at least this legislative session and probably well into the future. So you've actually asked 2 or 3 questions or implied 2 or 3 questions in here. And so, the kind of first simple one is, no, I don't think Texans should treat this as a one-off kind of effect that's never going to happen again. Unfortunately, this is not the worst winter that Texans have seen on record. This does happen sporadically throughout our history. Secondly, Texas is a growing state. And as you have more people move into the state, you have more demand on the electricity, and that all-important margin shrinks. And it doesn't just shrink in the winter, it shrinks in the summer. So I think there's some long-term supply issues that will need to be addressed. And then the third facet of this that I think you've implied is that there is a strain of theoretical approaches dealing with climate change that effectively says that climate change alters our weather patterns in order and makes them effectively more harsh. And in order to take care of people properly, your system needs to be prepared to handle a wider variety of impacts than it has in the past. And it's not just winter weather impacts, it's also summer demand, and it's also the strength of the hurricanes, which has also been known to take out power lines, especially on the Texas Gulf Coast for longer periods of time.
So the focus of all of this in the week and so that's followed has turned to the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, as we've seen over and over again in the news, where you have kind of an independent agency here operating that really elects its own. It perpetuates itself by choosing people to be on this particular council. Of course, it's overseen by the Public Utility Commission of Texas, but ERCOT made the news in so many different ways, especially not only in the decision they had to make to start these rolling blackouts and to try to make this work in some way, but then also because in the days that followed, we heard that we were near a catastrophe that could have taken down the grid in Texas, possibly for months, because of the damage that could have been done to the system if they had not taken these measures. So I guess one focus here is on ERCOT in terms of how Texas manages its electricity grid. And I guess the question here is this part of the solution and part of the problem? I mean, a direction has been here that Texas wants to manage its own resources. We didn't see other states that had some of this extreme weather having the challenges that happened in Texas. So I think part of it here is helping people understand why did this happen in Texas in relation to the way we manage the provision of electricity through this kind of coordinated effort, if I'm understanding it correctly, because it brings together all the providers, and then of course customers as the law changed in I think 99, where they had selection that they could choose the servicers, the people who they basically pay their bill to that are buying power from these different markets that are there. I know I'm trying to understand it in my own way, but also I think it's important that we help people understand how this actually works.
So I think let's start with a review of the basics if you're not familiar with the structure of the electricity generation infrastructure in the United States. In essence, Texas separates into three interconnected markets, what we call the Western interconnection, the Eastern interconnection, and the Texas interconnection. And it's very difficult, but not impossible, to send power across those three separate markets. There is some interconnectivity between Texas and Oklahoma. There's some interconnectivity, very limited, between Texas and Mexico. But by and large, one of the rules is that you can't send power across those three groupings. Within most of those groupings, in the Western and in the Eastern, there are multiple markets that are overseen by some kind of ISO. So you've got, say, for example, the California ISO or the Southwestern ISO, and they can send power back and forth between those two markets because there is a physical connection of the electricity line. The same thing is also true on the Eastern seaboard. And the Eastern market is geographically the largest. There are multiple markets on the Eastern coast where if there is a problem in what we call the PJM market, you can turn around to one of its neighboring markets and say, please send power here. Texas is different. In Texas, the Texas Interconnect and the ERCOT market are exactly identical. And so we didn't have the option to turn around and to say to one of our neighboring markets, we're in trouble, send us power, because the interconnections just don't work that way. The question has been whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing. And the answer is, it depends. There are times like the time we just have last week where that lack of interconnectivity badly hurt the state of Texas. But if you go farther back into our history, the fact that Texas is separate also protects us, because there have been times when we've had blackouts on the Eastern market, and that lack of physical connectivity ended up protecting Texas from suffering those blackouts as well. So I think from a physical structure of how the market works, to say that one is inherently good or one is inherently bad, I think I would just merely say, well, it's just different. It's the way Texas has chosen to set things up. But I also think you're asking some questions here about political culture. And Texans wanting to have their own grid historically. And I don't think that that's going to change, interestingly, after this setup. I think people are increasingly viewing what happened in Texas as being mismanagement by ERCOT. And there's also been some considerable conversation around the fact that a number of members of the ERCOT board not only were not from the state of Texas, at least one of them does not live inside the United States. And so I think there's been a sense among Texans that part of the reason why ERCOT didn't do or act the way Texans wanted it to is because there were people who were on the ERCOT board who were not immediately familiar with the state of Texas.
So related to the board, what is the benefit of having this independent counsel in a way of managing this? I mean, I know a lot of it connects with industry, the people who are on the board and so on. It's the Public Utilities Commission is appointed by the governor, so that there's the connection there to the state agency infrastructure. But I think maybe this is going back a little bit to the creation of something like this in order to be able to have this management of electricity and the grid and so forth in the state, and have this kind of independence with it, having its benefits, and then of course we saw the challenges. But what is the kind of the rationale in managing it the way that we do, and having this distinction between because this has evolved over time in the last few decades in terms of how we've changed responsibilities and kind of shifted things to oversee this part of it as energy demands have grown, as Texas produces a large amount of energy in and of itself through a variety of ways. Maybe that's something that is helpful in understanding the way forward.
I'm not sure that I understand exactly what the question is. ERCOT is technically a 501c4 nonprofit agency, and it exists to represent the voices and management of, by and large, suppliers of electricity. And then under our deregulation structure, people who resell that electricity to individual Texas consumers. It has served primarily as what I would call a technocratic institution that is filled with people who have technical knowledge of electricity generation and some significant public administration, public management system within the state of Texas. I think if there's kind of a fatal flaw that I've seen in the early days of the management of the state, it's that there was a lack of creativity or a lack of understanding what the worst case scenario might look like in the state of Texas. I think Texans tend to think of the worst case scenarios as being some kind of disastrous hurricane striking the Gulf Coast and not necessarily an Arctic cold front coming in. And from everything we've seen, it just looks like that people didn't consider the fact that, yes, you could have pipelines freeze, and not only do pipelines freeze, everything in the pipelines freeze, including water. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the wind turbines. There's been a lot of talk about the natural gas supply. I haven't heard all that much about the fact that the plants didn't winterize their water piping. And you have to wonder from a technical level why that one facet was overlooked, because it would seem to me that would be kind of winter 101. And that, to me, is the question I'm looking to see answered in the bigger picture of things.
So along that line, when you're looking at something that is attempting to keep this in a, I would say, rather than it be government controlling directly utilities, you've got corporations out there who are manufacturing electricity in various ways. Of course, the cost is a factor here as well, because you're kind of playing kind of a long-term, not necessarily a game, but you're taking risks, just as you would in any business, and knowing that, okay, we could have conditions that would necessitate certain things like winterizing pipes and so forth. Is this an industry problem now in terms of looking at the fact that this can happen in Texas, or is this a of both and, where government's going to have to be involved, because I could see one thing coming out of this, if companies, providers are having to, or manufacturers are having to look at the expense of doing something like this, that's going to impact energy prices. And on the other side, there's a political ramification of this as well, as we've already seen with the governor, and we'll talk about that in the legislature in a moment. But where does this kind of thing fall when you're talking about something that's kind of viewed as a public service by the public, but it really is something that is private industry providing a good here that is needed, that people need in order to and society to function?
Well, I think you just framed it exactly correctly. On one hand, here there is undoubtedly a legislative failure in that the Texas Ledge probably should have ordered the electric utility generators to winterize a long time ago. This is not the first time we've seen these kinds of problems in the winter, although this is certainly the largest scale we've seen them on in terms of number of facilities impacted. And then I think the second question is correct. And once you foresee electric generating utilities to winterize, something that is incredibly expensive. What happens to the cost of electricity in the state of Texas? How long do you allow companies to recover those costs? I think you can control the cost by spreading out the recovery over a longer stretch of time rather than making everything be paid for over the cost of 2 or 3 years. Maybe the time horizon is 10 to 15 years, so you lessen the impact. Is this a grant program that the state of Texas wants to put forward to start winterizing at some of our smaller facilities? I think that's a policy design question that probably needs to be asked. But at the end of the day, Texas is looking at some kind of large bill, not only to make up for what happened, but to try to figure out how to finance what we want in the future. Because quite frankly, even if Texas chose to interconnect, I don't think those interconnections are going to be sufficient to protect supply and demand, especially as you head farther south across the state.
Well, we saw a number of sessions ago where the state provided loans that were guaranteed by the rainy day fund to water districts and water suppliers to try to upgrade their systems so they were more efficient, kind of looking at, which again, that's another problem, that we not really come to grips with. 5 years ago, we had a drought, a lot of challenges and so forth, a lot of adjustments, but not necessarily for the long term in order to meet the water demands, the growing water demands of the state. And you see something like this as well as to whether the legislature will kind of move forward with something on this. And I think that leads to my next question in looking at the governor who responded to this. And what really role he has. Of course, he appoints the people to the Public Utility Commission, and does is there much more than the governor can do other than declaring this an emergency item on the agenda of the legislature? Where does the task lie, I think, with the legislature in going forward? I think you mentioned a few things here. Do you think that something will come out of this legislative session? What do you see may happen in the weeks and months ahead that may set this on a course to try to address these issues?
Well, I think there's kind of two issues here. I hope the Texas Ledge deals with this. And now the question is going to be, where does the money come from? Because there's several competing priorities here. And then the one we haven't mentioned, we've got a number of school districts who have busted pipes, who are going to have to replace those pipes. And in rural areas, that's going to be a challenge to fundraise that. So when you have zero-sum games in your budgeting process, which Texas does, what one group gets, another group does not, I think there's some very real challenges and balancing acts that the Texas Ledge is going to have to decide on with education and with COVID-19 funding, also competing for funding on our list, along with welfare services, given the number of Texans who are unemployed right now. So I don't know that I've got any particular crystal ball to say that Texas winterizing wins on those priorities. My guess is that the immediate needs of the people and the citizenry will come again before some kind of preparation for a winter event that may not happen again for a couple of years, unfortunately. And so I think, I don't see funding for this being a priority for the state legislature, even though it is something that we need and will need before the next winter storm, whatever that may be. And then with regard to the second question that was kind of implied in here, can the governor do something else? I think at this point, the ball is in the Texas Leg's court. The powers of the governor are relatively limited in this state. And other than removing some appointees or replacing some appointees at the Public Utility Commission in Texas, there's not a lot he can do while the legislature is in session. And so, again, I think really at this point, I'd want to see what Dan Patrick is thinking, and then, of course, what our new Speaker of the House is thinking as well.
So we know that this will continue to be a political issue. The challenges here, on the one hand, when we know the dynamics there, that utility companies are big lobbyists and have been to try to keep cost off of their books so that they can make revenue. We don't really, the consumer's taxed on energy usage. We do have some things that are that are there that could be looked at, but to me it seems like, looking at the past history of this, that there's not really the motivation to put any of this cost back onto the companies themselves that manufacture the electricity, unless it's done through, like we talked about, maybe something long term where it's financed and then the legislature kind of forces them to say, okay, we can't go through this again. We've got to put a mechanism in place. I don't know. I'm having taught Texas government for a number of years. I'm a little concerned about the time that they have to actually really look into and engage with something like that in this session, to think of what outcome may be of benefit to the people of the state, without this just kind of saying, okay, well, we got through this winter. Let's hope it doesn't happen next winter because the legislature will meet again in 2 years. Let's deal with this on a long-term basis in terms of giving it some attention and seeing what needs to be done. To me, that fits the pattern. Again, I don't know, because part of this with an issue like this is how quickly does it go away in terms of the time frame that the legislature's in session and what they could deal with. Or, as we already know, we're probably going to have a special session on redistricting. Could this be an issue that's pushed a little further down the road, just not 2 years? I don't know if you see anything in that scenario that either does that make sense in understanding the way the legislature works, or do you see other aspects of that are important now?
Well, I think there's probably 2 or 3 things that need to enter into some kind of analysis. One is that Texans are going to get bills for this, and some of the bills are going to hit immediately, and some of the bills are going to be clearly spread out over the course of time. There's numerous court cases that have been filed that are going to keep this in the news. The second part of this is that, theoretically speaking, Abbott's running for re-election. And what does he do with regards to this? And does this last long enough to become an election issue in 2022? And if I rather suspect, because we're going to have the special sessions anyway, and because it is an election year, I think Abbott looks much more in tune with the desires of Texans to call the special session to deal with this, rather than to try to go back to a business as usual session and run for re-election and governor in the near future. And so I think some of it may well end up on what Abbott decides he wants as far as campaign election conditions, assuming, of course, that he's running for re-election in 2022, because at this point, I don't know that that's a given either.
Very true. I mean, we're seeing a number of people as COVID lingers and we're trying to navigate the pandemic, the tremendous stress it's putting on public officials and trying to manage through this. Thinking ahead, then, what do you see anything coming out of this that has a major impact on energy policy in the state? And I know that's a very broad question because energy policy covers just so many different areas. But is this an event that means that, yes, we need to make adjustments, we need to winterize, we need to be prepared that this is going to happen again? Or does this cause any kind of engagement with the way that we're doing this, the way that we're managing it, the way we use all different types of energy, from nuclear to gas plants to wind energy? Where do you see us going? And that may be something that's already a course that's set. And does that change?
I don't know that the future of energy policy in the state of Texas is something that's fixed and unchanged. Interestingly enough, the one I've heard, I don't know the most, is do we need another nuclear power plant? And I think you've got proponents of unpopular energy types who perceive that they have an advantage here and that they're going to press it. Are they going to make it through the public policy process or an facility siting process? I don't know. I don't know that Texas would want a fifth nuclear power plant, but certainly there's an opportunity that hasn't been there in the past to at least float the idea. I think Texans' perception of renewable energy is damaged more so than anything else right now. Interestingly enough, natural gas seems to be holding out better, even though in terms of percentages, more natural gas plants went offline than wind turbines did. But whoever speaks first frequently shapes their discourse, and that's the direction that the conversation has taken for the moment. In terms of kind of this bigger question of energy policy, energy policy isn't just made up of the decisions that governments make. It's also consists of the decisions individuals make. Virtually everybody I've talked to has some kind of plan to insulate themselves from a second impact in the future. A lot of people discovered that they have low-hanging fruit in and around property in places where people are fortunate enough to own their own property. And so really one of the things I've heard is a lot of home repair and pipe insulation kinds of things that make an impact under certain circumstances. And so you've got not only the top-down process, but you also have the bottom-up resiliency questions too. And in this state, I've got a little more faith in the bottom-up processes. That's technically where Texans have been better at things than they have on the top-down processes. So I think you'll see people take both approaches. Again, individual management is probably going to be more than the top-down, big infrastructure pictures than anything else.
Well, on this topic too, I do post articles or things that are helpful to people in kind of understanding this. If there's some links to some things that you think would be beneficial to people, please send those along to me. I certainly can connect them to, the ERCOT has a website if they want to learn about how that works as well. But I think some of these larger questions and issues related to energy policy, it's not something that people concern themselves with as much, except when they get a high utility bill because it's the cold of winter or the heat of summer, or we have something like this happen. And of course, the likelihood on a smaller scale is what we usually see, but having something statewide like this is certainly significant and is going to be in our conversation for a while to come. Ann, I want to thank you for joining me today on the show. This is very engaging, and it's something that we probably should come back to as we see the legislature responding and what decisions that they make in the months ahead, and whether that's a special session or something comes out of this legislative session. So I'd certainly like to have you back when we see some act or policy output by government in order to kind of engage with that and see how it connects to these issues.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed being with you and talking with you about this issue today, and I'd be happy to come back in the future.
Great. Thank you. This is Dr. Ann Egelston, who is an assistant professor of political science and director of the Center for Environmental Studies here at Tarleton State. Thank you, Ann. We're going to go to a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more on politics.
Politics can be confusing, but On Politics with Eric Morrow has your back. Follow the show on Facebook. Search On Politics with Eric Morrow to stay up to date with the show and all the sources to follow right along.
T for Texas is a Texas-based history podcast from historian Dr. T. Lindsay Baker. Find a new episode every Thursday morning wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to On Politics. I'm Dr. Eric Morrow, and we're glad you're joining us today and certainly listening about that timely issue of what happened in the past couple of weeks and the fallout from it related to electricity, energy production, the outages that we had across Texas, the challenges that we had with providing electricity, especially during a major winter storm that we experienced, and what is the path going forward. There's a lot of speculation about that, and we'll just have to wait and see what elected officials, energy companies, and so forth do in navigating that ahead. But we'll certainly stay with that issue, and we will be back to bring you more information and engagement with this. And I also want to affirm that we'll put some things on the Facebook page that's On Politics with Eric Morrow that will help you to understand a little bit of how this is all structured and to be able to engage with that a little bit more and to understand how something that is so critical, electricity, that we all often take for granted, is something that we need to be aware of how this is done and how it's managed and what is the role of government, especially in Texas, related to that. I want to move to the national level for the last segment of the show today, and that is to talk about related to political transition in Washington, D.C. with the new Biden administration, with the transition in power between parties. And of course, the first 100 days. And we hope to have Dr. Cross back in a few weeks to talk about the significance of this first 100 days of an administration and how that has been looked at historically. And then what does it mean now in terms of what the Biden administration is trying to do. But I want to talk about something that's kind of in the mix of all of that. This past week, or it's in this current issue for the month of March, but this past week, Washingtonian, the magazine from Washington, D.C., came out with its list of Washington's most influential people, which is a list of 250 experts and advocates outside of government. Okay, these are not people who are current government officials, but the ones who are policy shapers, the ones who impact what is going to be done by government, what is going to happen in the policy arena in the years to come, especially during the Biden administration. And as we know, the decisions that are made now will have a significant impact going forward in a wide range of areas. And so we're going to look at that in a moment, and I will post a link to that. It'll be available on the Facebook page as well, so that you can look at this and get a better idea and understanding of what we're talking about. But in the world of politics and policy making, where these intersect, is where you find people who are engaged with all different aspects of our life and economy and social areas, media, all of these people who are out there in various facets of American public life in some way, and that they engage with government in different ways because of the policy outputs they want, because of what they want government to do or to change, because of what they want a government to do that that has an outcome that is favorable to them. And so this is a part of politics that's not always front and center for most of us in the rest of the country, unless we're engaged with government and politics in Austin or in Washington, D.C. But it is a part of political life that is the kind of the normal routine, but it is also a part of political life that changes regularly. There are transitions, as we saw, as you have power transition between party and between administrations. That means that this changes. If it doesn't change party, it means that new people may come in and other people may be out, and some of the alignment of relationships may stay the same. What we often see when there is party transition in the White House or in Congress is that we see that alignment change significantly. And of course, that was the significance of not only Joe Biden winning the White House, but of Congress, the Democratic Party gaining control of Congress, already having it in the House, but now having that 50-50 split in the Senate with, of course, the vice president now. That is significant. It's huge because it changes that realignment. It means that a party and its agenda, depending on the issues that resonate with the president and with his role and power, have a better chance of being accomplished. And thus the alignment of these structures, and what I like to refer to them, and this is the literature on policy making, there are issue networks. There are people that are tied in that represent interest groups and advocacy groups. They have constituents that are from nonprofits and civic and social organizations to private companies in various areas of our economy and industry. All of this begins to align in different ways depending on the outcome of those elections. And so it began when Biden was elected president. It continued when the two senators from Georgia were elected as being Democrats, and of course joining the Senate to change that alignment there. So now that the Democrats are the majority party in both chambers, they have the likelihood that they're going to be able to push things through on the party agenda and on the agenda that connects with their constituents. So again, this creates it changes these issue networks. Here we were months ago, a Trump administration, a Senate controlled by Republicans, a House controlled by Democrats, and these issue networks look quite different. Because of the presidential administration, and especially related to Senate committees and what the agenda was there. And this is where we see some of the challenges sometimes with a split Congress. When you have one chamber controlled by one party and the other chamber controlled by the other, is that these issue networks become a little more challenging on major issues, on some issues, not always all. So what we've seen now with this transition are issue networks that are more in alignment, even though, as we do have to say, as with Democrats, as we would with Republicans, there is a tremendous amount of party diversity. And so issues that are favored by one part of the party may not be by the other, but still there is a sense of identity here in unity and engagement that aligns these networks. And so what we mean by networks are not just the informal political actors. So informal would be that they're not set up by the Constitution, interest groups, advocacy groups, political parties, constituents. But it's also those formal actors. So congressional committees, the members of Congress, the agencies of government that are responsible for policy implementation. This is all now a part of that. And in the executive, in the agencies of government that are in the executive branch, that the leadership of all of those agencies is going to transition to those people who are nominated by the president or selected by those that he nominates and that are approved by the Senate. So there is a significant amount of realignment going on now because of the election of Joe Biden as president. So I want to turn to this article because I think it's something that if you're not familiar with how this works, about how it is about power, who has power, who has the ability to use that power, whether that be in Congress, whether that be in the White House, or whether that be people who are in influential positions in a wide range of areas that can then connect with those in government. Remember, too, there's a connection here related to resources, to support for different policies, but then also the resources that are there that are needed for elections, and connecting with constituents in a way that moves you toward a favorable outcome in the next election cycle, because now we're starting to turn. And this is, I think, where 100 days becomes critical, is that after that 100 days, the focus now begins to be on those midterm elections, which will be coming up in 2022. The article in the Washingtonian actually divides this 250 most influential people into 16 different groups. So 16 categories that represent really the major policy areas that they see that the Biden administration and Congress will be addressing. And so these range, I'm not going to read through the full list because you can see the article online, but it starts with antitrust law, which is something that is going to be given attention in the Biden administration, and banking and finance, business and labor, civil rights and criminal justice, all the way to healthcare, immigration, national security and defense, tech and telecom. I mean, all of these are major policy areas they're in existence anyway. It's just that there's not always things moving, or it's not moving in alignment with a party when they come into power. And that's what we see here, having a one-term president now being replaced by a president who is from another party. And of course, all of this realignment that's going on will then align that agenda of the party and of those people in power with the outcomes that they want. And so that is why this is changing. And so I want to just give you a little bit of idea of this when you look down in some of these sections. So let's talk banking and finance. I mean, maybe that might not be the sexiest subject to talk about here, but you see some people with different companies. And that's what I like about this article, is it connects you back to the company or organization that they're involved in. So in banking and finance, we see people like Naomi Camper, who is the chief policy officer of the American Bankers Association. You see Richard Hunt, Consumer Bankers Association president and CFO. You have Aaron Klein, who is a senior fellow that writes on these topics at the Brookings Institute. So you have think tanks. You have Bill Nelson, Bank Policy Institute. He's the executive vice president and chief economist. So think tanks, institutes, organizations that are giving a scholarly study to critical issues. Sometimes they do have a particular driving ideology that guides that and how that they look at it. But these are groups that are going to be engaging with any kind of policy change that's going to be proposed by people in Congress. Again, another grouping that they have here is business and labor. So they have the senior director of global trade policy from Pfizer. Pfizer is a big name now, has been in pharmaceuticals, but because of the vaccine and because of the potential that has and what the needs are in this global pandemic. Benjamin Applebaum, a writer in the editorial board of the New York Times, very influential in mass media. Tom Benet, National Restaurant Association president and CEO. You have Joshua Bolton, Business Roundtable president and CEO. Neil Bradley of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Dan Bryant of Walmart, senior vice president of global public policy and global affairs or government affairs. So you see these kinds of people who are significant in that area that are going to be very influential, major players, consulting in some ways, are being brought in or trying to influence and impact the policies that are going to be happening or developing in the months ahead. Civil rights and criminal justice. You have Melanie Campbell, National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. David Cole, the National Legal Director of the ACLU. Eric Holder, Attorney General under the Obama administration, but is a partner at the law firm of Covington and Burlington. Van Jones, who's a media personality, but is also the CEO of the Reform Alliance. Some of you may have seen him on CNN. Hillary Shelton, the director of the Washington Bureau of the NAACP. So again, you can see how these organizations align with the topics. We look at further down at education is one that will probably be given some significant attention. Mildred Garcia, American Association of State Colleges and Universities. Rick Hess, American Enterprise Institute, is a resident scholar. Rodriguez Murray, United Negro College Fund. Becky Pringle, National Education Association. Randy Weingarten, American Federation of Teachers. Okay, so along with this, and I think this is what's unique about a list like this, is it really connects you to those organizations, those national organizations that have representation in Washington. They have offices there. They connect with lawmakers. They follow policy. This is great because you can go to their websites and you can see not only their agenda, you can see the policy issues that are important to them, but you can see what they're going to advocate. What are they engaged with? What are they attempting to accomplish in the opportunities that they have to meet with and get information to those who have political power, those who are in office. Energy is another group here. We have a couple of the other groups include good government. We mentioned healthcare. Here you have the Vice President of Federal Government Affairs of Johnson & Johnson, Jane Addams, Stuart Butler from Brookings, Michael Cannon from the Cato Institute, Director of Health Policy Studies, Chip Davis, Healthcare Distribution Alliance, Dan Diamond, he's the National Health Reporter of the Washington Post, Megan Donovan, Guttmacher Institute, which is one I've used some of their materials in classes to talk about different health issues. You have Scott Gottlieb of the American Enterprise Institute, Guinevere Kinney of the Urban Institute. And then, of course, you have businesses like Humana and Cigna, their representatives, AARP, very, very powerful group in terms of its membership and its engagement with policy that affects senior citizens. There's academics in here as well. Lynn Nichols from George Mason University, and a few others that are from different institutes or universities and institutes related to those universities in Washington, D.C. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention. It's something that takes a little time to go through, and it's something you can come back to. I will post it on the Facebook page because I really think it's something that we all should be aware of how these kind of issue networks function and how do things move forward? How do things get done? Who are the people who are advocating for different policies in different areas? And this is just kind of a glimpse of it. It's a glimpse at the seat of power of Washington, D.C., where government is, and the groups that are represented there that have a presence there that are trying to have a significant influence. I want to thank you for joining me today on Politics. We're right here each week, Sunday at noon. And you can also listen to us on tarletonradio.com. That's KTRL 90.5 FM. And you can also listen to this episode in its entirety on SoundCloud after the show has aired, as well as download it as a podcast. So we're available in multiple formats so that you can engage with very critical and timely issues on the show each and every week. I look forward to being back with you again next week as we move forward with our focus on issues related to the Biden administration, the state legislature in Texas, and other things that are impacting our lives in a variety of ways. Thank you for joining us today.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from me, Taylor Welch, and me, Carissa Cole.
Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.